All right, so one of my favorite books as a child when I was growing up was, as you might guess from this illustration, Crockett Johnson's classic picture book, Harold and the Purple Crayon. And I don't know if any of you have read that book or read it when you were little, and if you did, you might remember that in the book, Harold draws his way through all kinds of events in his life with this simple purple crayon and eventually back to bed. And besides appreciating the simplicity and the style of it, I thought, or I was drawn to, I should say, the magic idea of creating one's own destiny, kind of really literally charting one's own course through life. And I've since come to view it as also a wonderful parable of accountability, of taking responsibility for our choices. And as such, I think it's a really, really great metaphor for writers and for the way in which we, these days, as writers, have to take responsibility and be accountable for not only our success as authors, but for our success in terms of publishing and the business end of our work. My mother and I, can you hear me? Can everyone hear me okay? Let's see. I think I'm hitting the wrong button. Which one is it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Next.
You just click this one. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't take me there though.
No. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Okay, there's Harold. Wonderful. Charting his way through life. And we should be, there we go. So my mother and I co-wrote our first children's book together 12 years ago. And since then, we've actually written 18 books together. One is coming out in the spring, across all genres. Picture books, board books, early readers, young adult novels, middle grade readers. I can read books, pretty much every aspect of children's publishing. And we have 2 more in the pipeline as we speak. So fairly busy 12 years, as you could gather. We've also published an additional 10 books in the Julie Andrews collection, and I'll show you some of them here, by third-party authors under our Julie Andrews Collection Publishing Program. These are our books, and we've worked with 3 major publishing houses. We've worked with Hyperion at first, HarperCollins, and Little Brown, which is where we are today. And in that 12 years since we started writing together, we've been on an incredible learning curve about what it is to be a writer and the unique challenge of, in particular, writing for children. The necessary economy of writing for kids is deceptively difficult, as you might imagine. The amount of streamlining that takes place in order just to keep the action moving forward and to allow for the illustrations to reveal as much as the text makes creating children's books a little bit like writing haiku. Our editor is constantly redlining stuff and saying, the illustrations will show this, you don't have to say this, or is there a way we can better balance the text on this page with the amount of text on this page? What can we cut here? And so it's a real exercise in not just writing, but also thinking about the structure of a book in the limited number of pages that you have when you're writing for kids. We have learned a tremendous amount. As I said, very generally speaking, we've learned that girls will pretty much read books about boys or with boys as the principal characters, not so much the other way around. No matter how terrific a story for young readers might be, if it doesn't have a central character that's the same age as your intended audience, it's going to be a tough sell and tough to market. That old writer's adage, show, don't tell, is never truer than in the world of children's books, where you really have to reveal much more through character and dialogue and action than through description or exposition whenever possible. And probably most importantly of all, we've learned how important it is not to talk down to our readers, but rather to invite them to stretch up to what we write and to the vocabulary and so forth. We've also experienced a tremendous transformation in the marketplace in just 10 years. And this is where we get into some of the business side of things. And first, the bad news. So the expectations of an author today when it comes to their role in publishing and in the marketplace are vastly different from what they were, not just in Crockett Johnson's day of Herald, but also even when we started 12 years ago. 10 years ago at HarperCollins, the minimum sales requirement for a book, for a children's picture book, to be considered a success and basically to earn out was 15,000 units. That means 15,000 books. That was about 10 years ago. Today, I mean, that's a pretty daunting number, 15,000 units, right? So today, that number, thank you, Sam, is 50,000. That's happened in 10 years. If you don't sell 50,000 copies of your book, you basically didn't cut it. Not you didn't hit the bestseller list. I'm just talking about bare minimum 50,000 copies. That's a lot of books to have to sell, right? At our new home, now HarperCollins is a pretty big house. HarperCollins, of course, is one of the big houses. And a large house like HarperCollins publishes about 1,200 books a year. So if you think of it, that's about an average of 3 books a day. And at our newest home, Little Brown, they publish 350 books a year, which is still about a book a day, right? Every single day, a book coming out into the marketplace that has to be promoted, that has to be distributed, that has to be marketed, it has to be sold. So large or small, there is simply no way that one publishing house can put the same amount of marketing and promotion muscle behind every single book they sell. They just don't have the resources or the personnel to do it. And so the strategy these days has become for publishing houses, no matter what size they are, to throw all their weight behind the handful of books that they believe have the best shot at rising to the top, and pretty much leave the others to muddle through by themselves. Books these days are acquired by publishers as much on what publishers perceive to be the author's platform, meaning their connections, who they know, the audience that they've already got, as on the merit of the book and the writing itself. Okay? So that's a book a day. Truthfully, we learned this the hard way, my mom and I. We were pretty naive when we first started writing together, and we naively imagined that writers wrote and publishers published. Like most fledgling authors, we thought our job was to try to write a good book and then just show up for whatever was asked for us in terms of the marketing and the promotion, and leave the logistics of what all that was to the various people behind the scenes in the in-house departments whose job it was to organize that. So those early efforts of ours in our fledgling writing days barely broke even. As we navigated that steep learning curve I was talking about, we began to realize that we stood a much better chance of actually really selling our books, and therefore maybe being asked to write more books, if we got proactive about the sales and marketing ourselves, and the difference was astonishing. So we got to experience firsthand the really vast chasm between the relative failure of some of our books, albeit arguably worthy ones, such as nice historical fiction based on a terrific French legend with knights in shining armor and a love story and a real animal hero. And this one we took no real responsibility for helping to sell, because we didn't really know enough to know to do that at the time. And then the books we got behind with every creative idea and resource we could muster, which subsequently ended up at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list and went into multiple reprints. And that's the only bragging you'll see me do today. But that's pretty exciting. Okay. So you might think that with a name like my mom's, sales would take care of themselves. Oddly enough, in a lot of ways, we found that to be a detriment as much as it is an advantage, because often we've had to work almost twice as hard to offset the challenges of being perceived as a quote-unquote celebrity author, about which there is a tremendous stigma in the writing business, in the industry, particularly with the school and library community, but even in the sales and publishing community as well. It turns out that if you've established a name for yourself in another field, many publishers assume that you come in with a built-in audience. I mean, that you come in with a PR firm, a publicity machine, you know, all these people waiting to hear what you have to say, and they take a big sigh of relief and they go, okay, cross that off the list, we don't have to worry about that one. That will sell itself, right? As I said, there's also this stigma about celebrity publishing, and we often find ourselves on the receiving end of this kind of snobbery or assumption that we're just vanity publishing. And so librarians and booksellers often will just dismiss us out of hand, or books that they perceive to be celebrity authored. And critics will often approach reviews with a pretty sizable deck of judgments stacked against it. And awards committees pretty much ignore celebrity authored books altogether. So even though, my mom said this morning at this teachers' convention, she said, you know, I know that I'm perceived as a celebrity author, and I have to say this really ticks me off. She said, because she's been writing for 40 years. She started writing children's books long before we started writing together. I think she started writing before there was such a thing as a celebrity author. Nonetheless, it's where we land. So we've had to roll up our sleeves and get to work, and we've had to get as creative as possible about the many different ways that we can support each of our books. And we've had to look for ways to reach out to our readers and to our librarians and to booksellers and to educators and to all the movers and the shakers in the industry wherever we could to try to reframe our experience. Now, because I also, in addition to being a children's book author and a teacher and an arts educator in the MFA Writing and Literature program at Stony Brook, I also moonlight as a freelance children's book editor. I know that we're not alone in our experience. I know that emerging and established writers still dare to think that once a book is written, the work is done, and it's now about finding the right agent or the right publisher, and they'll take it to the next step while we get to go back and start work on our next project. Whether we are working in a large house as writers or a small independent house, or we're planning to self-publish, it's really clear today that as writers, we have to be prepared to do a lot more than just write if we want to keep writing. That is, if we want to experience high enough sales and royalty levels instead of high return levels so that we can continue to be published. I'm sure you've all heard it said that we all run at least two businesses, the business we're in and the business of marketing the business we're in. And writers are often daunted by this, as most artists are. They think, I'm an artist, I don't know anything about marketing or sales or business. But the truth is, I'm going to show you that this is the chain of command that a book has to go through. A children's book has to go through this particular chain of command before it falls into the hand of even just one child. Okay, these are the people that it has to impress before it reaches a child. It starts with the agent who sells it to the publisher, particularly the editor at the publisher's house. Once that editor has decided, yes, we're going to publish this book, and the house has decided to acquire it, they have to pitch it to the marketing department at the publishing house, who has to say, this is worth us getting behind and supporting because this is going to do well for us. The marketing department has to then pitch it to the sales reps who are out in the fields pitching the book to the bookstores, to the booksellers and librarians, saying, this is why you should buy our book from this publisher and not that book from that publisher this year. And that bookseller or librarian then has to pitch it to the book buyer, whether it's the teacher or the parent or the grandparent or the nice aunt or uncle, before it even falls into the hand of that one child. Now for the good news. It's a lot like grabbing hold of the purple crayon. Because new developments in technology and fresh approaches in marketing have made it so much easier than it would have been even 10 years ago for writers to chart their own publishing course. And I can tell you firsthand, it's also really fun. Because what I've found is that you just have to strategize the marketing and promotional ideas to support a book as creatively as you approach the writing of the book itself. It becomes a creative challenge, just like writing is a creative challenge. You have to apply the same level of imagination to your marketing plan as you do to writing your stories. So here then are some tools, some crayons, if you will. I've said that already, and that's out of the way. Here we go. Here are the crayons that I've found to have made the most impact on the business of selling our books so far. First one is something that you're probably all already doing, and that is start by making each book the very best it can be from the writer's standpoint. That's pretty self-evident and obvious, right? But particularly if you're just starting out or you're new to a genre, you want to make sure you know the genre that you're writing for, that you know its styles, you know its requirements. You want to make sure that you've been studying, well, you guys have all been studying writing techniques here, so I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, but that your work is as lean and clean and polished as it can be before you present it to anyone, and that is agent or editor. Okay? How do I do that? Maybe you want to hire, no self-promotion here, but maybe you want to think about hiring a freelance editor to help you put that final polish on before you submit. Maybe you're in a writing club. Maybe you go to writers' conferences and share your work there and get feedback from other writers. But you really want to make sure the book is in the best possible shape it can be in before you submit. You want to research your competition in the market, and you want to include that information in your submission with your proposal, along with information about why your book is different. In other words, you want to know that, you know, if you've written a book about a train who is determined and stalwart and may or may not get up that hill, you want to be able to say, there is another book out there that's kind of like this, but here's why my book is better. Or here's why my book is going to sell. Or that just shows that there's a market for this kind of book, right? You want to be very, very specific in letting your publisher and or your agent that you're submitting to know what you will be able to bring to the process in terms of marketing strategies, platforms, networks, etc. when you make your submission. You want to be able to say to them, I have 3,000 friends on Facebook, and I plan to pitch this to every single one of them, right? You want to be able to really be clear about how much you know and how much you're willing to step up to the plate. I love to travel. I have friends in every city I can stay with. You won't have to pay for my accommodations. Whatever it is, let them know that you can really step up to the plate. The next one is know the market. And I should just preface the previous one by saying the thing about making the book the best it can be is it really does make a difference, because I don't know if everybody here knows, but acquisitions decisions, the way in which a publisher decides to acquire a book, those decisions are made by committee. So you could have an editor say to you, I really love this book and I'd really love to publish it, but I have to go back and sell it to the rest of the editors in my acquisitions committee first. And it's a very, very kind of competitive, tough process there. And I've been a fly on the wall in a lot of those acquisitions meetings, as well as having made some acquisitions decisions myself in the Julie Andrews collection. And I know that sometimes editors won't even go past the first page if it feels overwritten or underdeveloped or derivative or out of touch with the marketplace. So you really want to be sure that you're in the best possible shape before you submit. Okay, so we're going to talk about knowing the market, familiarizing yourself with what's happening, what's selling, what the current styles and trends and approaches are, and there's some really incredible resources in this regard. And in the interest of time, because we don't have a whole lot of time, I'm going to blast through these, but feel free to ask for details afterwards about a specific thing that I talk about if you want to know more. Obviously, there are a number of wonderful publications. You guys are in writers' clubs. You may know a lot of these, but if you don't, these are some of the best ones that you should know about. The Literary Marketplace. That one's very expensive. The best place to find Literary Marketplace is in a library, because that is very expensive. The rest are fairly accessible. Children's Writers and Illustrators Market is a publication that comes out annually, published by Writer's Digest. It tells you who the agents are at what house, because there's a tremendous amount of turnover, and agents move from publisher to publisher every year. You want to know who the agents are, who their assistants are, what their submissions guidelines are, and so forth. You'll find all of that in Children's Writers and Illustrators Market. And there is Writers and Illustrators Market of all kinds of genres. So if you're not a children's book writer specifically, pick up a copy of Writers and Illustrators Market, or Mystery Writers and Illustrators Market, or Romance Writers and Illustrators Market, whatever, Poetry Writers and Illustrators Market, whatever your genre is. Publishers Weekly, obviously, is the industry trade magazine. It's something that you really want to be familiar with. It comes out every week. Actually, there's a daily digest that you can get an email free in your email box every day. It's a great way to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry. And then magazines like Writer's Digest are great. They have contests and they sponsor competitions and awards for best writer's blog and website and things like that. And of course, there are some wonderful, much more highbrow literary journals out there which are wonderful too, and many of which I'm sure you're familiar with. But all of those will give you a really good sense of the temperature of the marketplace, what's happening, what people are buying, what they're responding to. I particularly like this book, Guerrilla Marketing for Writers, because it's just chock-a-block with great ideas and suggestions. Okay, number of organizations you should be aware of as writers. If you're interested in writing for children, you definitely want to know about the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. This is the number one organization for people interested in writing for kids. Incredible resource. Annual conferences 3 or 4 times a year all over the country. Fabulous website. Just for joining, for a nominal membership fee, they'll send you this welcome kit with just about everything you'd ever want to know about writing for children from the SCBWI. So I really recommend it. And they have a monthly publication as well, a magazine that is really great. Obviously, the Authors Guild is a writers' union, tremendously important for advocacy and taking advantage of things like free legal advice if you need it for contract negotiations. And then organizations like the American Library Association and the International Reading Association, who sponsor not only publications and great websites, but also annual conferences and so forth. Lots of children's book and other websites. These are just some of the best ones. These are obviously specific to children's books, but there are zillions of them out there for writers of all genres. And if you get involved with one, that will lead you to the next, which will lead you to the next. I really recommend that you familiarize yourself. Media Bistro, in particular, is not specific to children's books, although there is a children's book section. And they have great things like job openings in the literary marketplace that they post there, courses, online courses, writing courses that they'll offer in particular disciplines. Jacket Flap is a writer's social networking site, kind of Facebook-ish, but specifically to writers. So these are all really good sites to know. These are Kidlet Blogs. This is a huge movement. Most of these Kidlet blogs are run by librarians and English teachers and reading specialists. They really take themselves very seriously. So one of the best endorsements you can get as a children's book author is to be profiled or reviewed on one of these blogs. It's sometimes even more, to get Esme Codell or the head librarian in the New York City Public Library to do a profile on you on her blog with X number of tens of thousands of readers is probably just as good as a good review in School Library Journal or something like that. So good to know about literary blogs. Other things to bear in mind, festivals and trade shows, such as the one I was in this morning, the English Teachers Conference, things like Book Expo America. I'll get more into those later. And also, hanging out if you're interested in children's books, hanging out in the children's book section of libraries and bookstores and seeing what kids are picking up and what they're responding to and what they're drawn to. Listening to booksellers talk about what's selling and what's moving and why. And that would be true of any genre, hanging out in that particular section, whatever your genre is, and seeing what's working and what isn't. And obviously, if you write for kids, it's really important to have kids around that you can read to and hang out with and be your test market. Okay, having a niche is really helpful. It's not essential, but boy does it help if you become known as the person who writes X. And this was a lesson that took us a really long time to learn, and I think we're still learning it because we write for so many different genres, because as I said, we have board books and baby books and chapter books and picture books and early middle grade readers and so forth. Booksellers and book buyers didn't know what to do with us. They didn't know where to find our books because we were spread out all over the store, all over the library. No one could say, oh, they're the people who write such and such. Oh, that's the guy who writes the Olivia books. No one could say that about us because we had so many different books under our belt. What we have begun to really focus our efforts on are books that celebrate the arts, essentially, the arts and the natural world. The arts and the environment and nature in our books. And so hopefully eventually we will become known as the place to go for quality books that celebrate those values. But really thinking about what your niche is, what you have to bring to the table, and what you're going to be the authority on in your writing will help tremendously at the end of the day when it comes to establishing an identity for yourself in the marketplace. And then, of course, once you've figured out what that niche is, knowing how to reach out to that specific community. For instance, for us, things really started to take off when we wrote a book called The Great American Massacre that took place in a theater on Broadway, and it was all about mice performing Broadway shows in the basement of a Broadway theater, but we used both my theater background and my mother's theater background as the sort of source material for the book. And there we were writing what we knew and speaking to our exact audience who knew us as theater people, and so that was kind of a gelling of all of those things coming together. So think about, once you've decided what your strength is, what your niche is, how do you reach that community? And for Massacre, we actually started selling that book in theater memorabilia stores, in places where theater people go and hang out. So that's a really important thing to consider as well. Okay, this was another big lesson. We thought our publishers were going to make all our promotional materials. We thought they would make postcards and bookmarks and brochures and nice cardboard kiosks and posters and things to help display our books. And sometimes they will, if they've got an enormous print run behind the book, and if yours is one of the books that they think is going to rise to the top and outsell any of the others. Otherwise, no. So for the first 10 years or so, this particular book, the poetry anthology that we're promoting right now, we're fortunate enough to have quite a bit of material that Little Brown has come out with to support us. Some postcards, a kiosk. It's the first time in 12 years we've ever had a little kiosk to promote our books in independent bookstores. But for many, many, many years we've been making our own, and we've printed bookmarks, and we've printed brochures, and we've printed postcards and posters, and these are things that you will use forever and ever as you do book signings and presentations and artist talks and so forth. It's just really, really helpful to have material for people to take away and explore after they've met you, after they've listened to you speak, after they've bought your signed book. And not just printed material, but things like web games and downloadable activities that are related to your book that you can host on your website, or teacher's guides. Sometimes a publishing house will write teacher's guides for you. If not, do it yourself. Go out and look at other teacher's guides and figure out how borrow the format and figure out what kinds of activities and educational games and opportunities and tie-ins you can come up with that will support your book that can be used in the classroom. We've written all our own teacher's guides, actually, believe it or not. Okay, web presence is self-evident these days, obviously. You need to have, as an author, you need to have a website, an author website. Ideally, you need to have not just one author website, but also an individual, at least single-page website for every one of your titles. Nowadays, when we were first starting out, this was hugely prohibitive. Nowadays, with WordPress and all the free open source web stuff out there, it's a whole lot easier. So you guys are kind of coming into this at just the right time. On your website, on your author website, you want to offer a complete biography. You want to have a media kit that people can download, your bio, your photograph, your headshot, any reviews that you've had of your book, related press material. You want to have maybe a frequently asked questions page, a link to your blog, perhaps a list of recommended reading in the genre or in the subject matter that you're writing about. As I said before, fun stuff, games, downloads, educational materials, teacher's guides. Maybe you're offering a weekly newsletter or a monthly newsletter or e-blasts to your readers, giving them updates on the subject matter that you're writing about. A calendar so that people can see where you'll be next, where will you be signing, where will you be speaking, what will you be doing, and then obviously links to buy your book. And not just Amazon, but Barnes & Noble and Borders and maybe other independents that you'd like to support as well. Okay, there are lots of other ways you can support your web presence. You can write articles for online e-zines. Many of you might know about this already, but there's just an incredible plethora of article database websites out there looking for articles. The value of this is you don't get paid for these articles. They get, you write an article, you post it on eZine or goarticles.com, and what you get is a byline. You get your byline that links back to your website so that anybody who reads that article can go back to your website for more information and maybe buy your book. That's what you're getting out of it. What the people who are buying and using your article are doing is they're looking all over the web for material. So you're exchanging your words and your material for a byline that might drive traffic to your website. It's a really valuable thing. The best articles are really short. They're like 200 words. So it doesn't have to take up a tremendous amount of your time. But if you can just, post every so often an article in the area that you're particularly writing about, you become, once again, the authority. And that helps build your platform. Amazon has, of course, Amazon author programs now. They have pages on Amazon where you can have all your books and your blog and everything all linked in one place. And obviously, as an author, there's pretty much nothing more important than having a Facebook page, not just a Facebook identity and Facebook friends, but a fan page as well, an author page. You want to separate those two things so that you have your professional page and your social page. And if you think you're going to go out there and become an author, I urge you to be very conscientious, starting now, about what you post on Facebook and in your social networking, because it's there forever. And you just want to think about the photos that you're putting out there and the messages that you're putting out there, because eventually it will become more of a promotional and marketing resource for you than a social networking opportunity, and you'll want to be sure that it supports you as best as possible. Other people's blogs are great. If there are other people out there who are in your genre writing the way you write and they have blogs, comment on their blogs, and then they'll comment on yours, and then you'll get traffic that way. It's a kind of a viral marketing strategy. And then there's this whole movement now on virtual book tours, which are pretty amazing. I'm not going to go into that too much, but there's a whole thing happening that's economy-driven, where publishers can't really afford to send authors out on book tours so much anymore. So they're doing it online. And people are hosting openings online and in chat rooms, and you get invited to the opening and kickoff party, and people comment and Twitter and blog and what have you in virtual book tours. Book trailers are becoming the hot new thing in promotion now. If you go to YouTube and look up book trailers, you'll see some pretty awesome short films. So people are really combining filmmaking with book promotion, which is exciting. Okay, then there's the partnering, fusion partners, affiliates, and so forth. That's looking for corporations or foundations or other like-minded organizations who might be interested in supporting your book. So, for example, when we came out with Thanks to You, we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if, a Pea in the Pod maternity store would be interested in carrying our book? Or Johnson & Johnson would want to stuff it in their little hospital bags that they give to new parents. Or, when we wrote The Great American Massacre, we thought, I wonder if Kraft Cheese would be interested in doing a promotion for us. Just think outside the box, right? Just get creative. Start thinking about what is in your book that some company out there might be interested in promoting, and therefore promoting your book because it would serve them. I'm not saying, write Coca-Cola in your book. I'm saying endorse something that has a shared value with another company, and you'll find that they will want to jump on board and help you. And some of those companies have big, big lists. And of course, friends with lists are important too. And this is a really often overlooked one. If your book is published and you are on Amazon, Amazon reviews are really powerful, reader reviews. You want to email your friends and say, please write an Amazon review. Anyone who's read this book, please post an Amazon review. It's really, really, really important, and it's often overlooked how critical that is and how easy it is to come by. It's free promotion. Okay, I said I'd talk a little bit more about festivals, trade shows, book fairs, and so forth. So the biggest commercial one is BEA. It goes around the world, around the country. Every year it's in a different city, but it's usually in a major city. It was just in New York this year. You've probably had it in Philly and will again. It's a really important book fair to attend to get a sense of what's happening in the marketplace. SCBWI has several conferences. These are all really important conferences to be aware of. And of course there are school author events that you can offer to be part of, such as this one. And there are obviously other kinds of marketing support you can look for out there. Something like, if you're lucky enough to have hire your own publicist. That's not something that we've done much of, but we have from time to time made a special effort for 6 months to promote one particular book, gone out on a limb to bring someone on board to help us. Asking people for testimonials on your website or endorsements on your, as I said, Amazon reviews, and looking for any kind of cross-promotional opportunity you can. It's all about viral marketing. It's all about spreading the word, getting the word out, providing stuff that will build your list and get people to buy your book so that the next book you write has a built-in audience already waiting for it. And the publisher that you submit it to will go, oh, we could sell this book because that person has a platform, right? This is something really interesting. For those of you who are interested in writing nonfiction, it's not so much true for fiction, but if you write nonfiction, and it can be true for fiction and children's books, but if you write nonfiction, there's this tremendous movement now amongst the writing community to repurpose material in all its forms. Like, the book is just the beginning. And the book is actually the least lucrative piece. So let's say the book is $14.95, but then you make an audiobook, and nowadays we can make our own audiobooks by recording them, at home on our computers practically. You can make related web games and downloads. You can write sequels, make a graphic book version, a song adaptation. You can parlay it into workshops and speaking engagements and teleseminars and ebooks, and then those things get recorded and made into DVDs and sold as educational devices afterwards. It's amazing, if you start thinking about it, how many ways you can repurpose one piece of writing. What Noelle mentioned, this musical that she came and listened to in Philly last year, Simeon's Gift, has an amazing trajectory. We started out when I was 5. That book started when I was 5 years old. Just a quick digression. I was 5. My parents were fairly recently divorced, living on opposite sides of the country, looking for a way to kind of make me feel like the family was still intact. My father's a designer, and my mom said, why don't we write a story together? When you go visit Dad, he can illustrate it, and then I'll bind it, and you'll have this memento of something that is the three of us together. And we did. We wrote this little fable, and he illustrated it, and she saved it. Years later, I'm talking years later, I unearthed that wonderful thing that she had saved me, and we looked at it together, and we thought, there may be something here. And we showed it to our editor, and she said, yeah, I think there is something here. It needs rewriting from an adult perspective now. But, see what you can come up with. We rewrote it. It became a picture book called Simeon's Gift. It's a book about music. It's about a traveling minstrel and who goes out to better himself and learn more about his craft, and learns about music through the sounds of nature and the world around him. So he learns about rhythm from drummers and soldiers drumming, and he learns about harmony from monks chanting, and he learns about all kinds of elements from the world around him. So we made a web game for kids to play, to make their own music from the sounds of nature on our website. And then from there, because that had musical elements, we were asked to adapt it into a stage adaptation. We made a small family musical for it, which we did a workshop of. And from there, someone came and listened to that small family musical and invited us to have it adapted for symphony orchestra. And that's how we ended up in Philadelphia at the Symphony Orchestra last year, as well as at the Hollywood Bowl and in Europe next year. So that one little story that started out as just a tiny thing that we wrote when I was 5 years old has gone on to this extraordinary life, being repurposed and repurposed and repurposed into all these new areas, with the same idea and the same mostly the same words, moving it forward. Okay, sometimes publishers will set up book signings for you. Mostly you have to cultivate them yourself. Mostly if you are... obviously, if your hometown is the first place to go and say, I'm a local author, can I do a book signing here? I'd love to come in. And the same is true for libraries. Consider other places than bookstores. Think about specialty stores relative to what you're writing about. If it's a garden book, think of a garden center book signing. If it's a children's book, think of a toy store. Clubs and fraternal organizations, Lions clubs and so forth, they're always looking for events and speakers and something for their membership. And whenever you travel, from the time you get your first book out there, you're never going to travel anywhere without first finding out if while you're there There isn't a school you could go to and do a presentation, or a bookstore you could go to and do a signing. That's just critical, because what you do is you look ahead and you go, I'm coming into town, I'm going to be in your area, I'd love to come and do a signing for you. And you'll find it's amazing how many times people will say yes. Can't rely on the Noels of this world to notice that you're in town and invite you to come. And when you do signings, and this is just wrapping up now finally, when you do these kinds of events, it's always important to try to make it as fun as possible and make it as much of an event as possible. Having your display materials, maybe doing readings from your book. You're always expected actually to do readings when you do book signings. I'm building in a practical component to that. You know, think about it. If it's a mystery, is there some sort of mystery activity you can throw out to your audience? Or if it's a children's book, you know, if your book is Blueberries for Sal, can you hand out blueberries afterwards? You know, think about some tie-in that you can do. Always build in extra time and plan to sign extra copies for the store, because they love that and they'll ask you back. Yesterday we signed 200 books for people in line at a bookstore in Washington, D.C., and after the signing was over, we signed another 100 books just for the store, because it matters, and that's the way they'll ask you back. And then another way to build your list is to do a little raffle while you're doing a signing. Ask people to give their business cards with their email address, in exchange for which at the end you'll do a drawing and somebody will get a free signed book or a package of books. And that way you get all those email addresses, and you say to them, if you don't want to be on my email list, just write it on the business card and I won't enter your name, but everybody's free to enter. And very few people will say, don't add me, because you get something free out of it, right? So these are just some of the ideas that we've been using, and this probably seems a little bit daunting and a little bit overwhelming, and so I'll leave you with a few simple words, some of my mom's and my favorite words from Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and they are: books matter, words count. And we spend a lot of our time advocating for the value of reading, the continued value of reading in our modern digital world. People often say, you know, what's going to happen to books? Are they just going to go by the wayside and become obsolete in the face of technology? And I think that actually, in fact, the NCTE, the teachers' organization where we were speaking this morning, made a statement just earlier last year saying, in the digital age, writing skills are going to be more critically important than they've ever been before. Because so much of everything we do in technology has its roots in writing. So work on your writing first. Don't be daunted by all the other stuff, but know that if you're serious, and if this is something you really want, there's a level at which you're going to need to be as creative about the professional side and the business side as you are about the creative side and about the writing side. If you are interested in writing children's books, I want to let you know that I have a blog. I practice what I preach, and a website at emmawaltonhamilton.com. And in my blog, I share tips for writers for children's books. So if that's something that you're interested in, I urge you to take a peek. And there are other resources for writers on that website as well. And I offer, I'm doing some e-courses and coaching, and in addition to my freelance editing. So please look that up and take advantage of it. And what I'd love to do now is just give you guys a chance to ask any questions if you have any energy left after that onslaught of ideas. And
let's applaud too, because this was fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So much information.
Well, a lot of information, yeah.
I'm curious how the process of illustration works. Like, do you do any of your own illustrations? And, like, if not, how do you...
Find an illustrator.
And how do you write the book? Like, do you have illustrations in mind of what you want to go along with everything?
Right, that's a really good question. We do not do any of our own illustrations. Neither of us is remotely an artist, I'm sorry to say, or at least not a graphic artist. But it is obviously, in the world of children's books, it's half, at least, usually half the book, and it's critically important and a huge piece. So few things that I will say are, first of all, when writing, one has to always write with the illustrations in mind, even if the ultimate illustrations end up being different than you as the author imagined them. You have to think in terms of, oh, the illustration will show that, I don't have to write that. Because you want the illustrations to be not just a mirror of the words, but an extension of the story. Okay, the best children's books are books in which the illustrations complement the text, not just reflect it. So you want to be very sure that you're not over-describing things which is information that will come from the illustrations. And that's one of the first editing tips I give my writing students, when you set about editing, first look through it and see, okay, is there anything in here that I can pull out because the illustrations will show it. So you want to write with the illustrations in mind. One of the single biggest and most common mistakes I see young aspiring children's book writers make when they start to go out there and dip their toe in the marketplace is thinking that they have to have an illustrator on board before they submit. And that's completely from the truth. Publishers do not want to see illustrations with your manuscript unless you are an author illustrator. And that's a big unless. I mean, if you are an author and you're an illustrator, and they're both equally strong, your art and your text, that's great. Go ahead and submit the two together. But I can't tell you how many times I've seen a book get rejected because, the author and the illustrator had already teamed up and the publisher loved the text but didn't like the artwork or vice versa. So absolutely don't partner with an illustrator if you can help it before you submit if you're not an illustrator yourself. Publishers take that very seriously. They consider it their job to find the right perfect match of an illustrator to an author. That's a huge piece of what they do. It's something they consider as part of their identity. And it's a real joy, actually, to work with the art director in a publishing house and have them bring in all these different styles and recommendations and suggestions and look through them, and you bring your ideas in and see, which direction will we go with this book. And sometimes you might be surprised about the direction a book would take artistically that might be very different than you envisioned, but it's a great idea from the publisher's point of view. And so I don't know if that answers all your questions, but that's what I would mostly say about illustration. Oh, one thing I will say is it's important when you're doing a layout if you write picture books specifically, which is a very specific genre. It's 32 pages, 16 double-page spreads. It's an industry standard. And there's a minimal amount of text per page, pretty much no more than 2,000 words to the whole book, ideally 1,000 words. So you're going to want to make sure there's a balance of text per page, and you want to think visually about at what point might the pages be turning here, and what might the corresponding images be, and let that kind of inform how you write it. And even go so far as to make a dummy for yourself where you have, the text on each page that you envision will be there, but don't submit it that way. Submit it as a manuscript in manuscript form, 250 words a page, 0.12 times New Roman font. I mean, that's the industry standard, and that's the way publishers want to see it, because you want to flatter their intelligence that they know how the book should be broken up, not tell them how the book should be broken up until you get the contract signed. Anybody else?
So if you're an illustrator and writer, and should you submit it together then as a complete bound book?
No, not as a bound book. Absolutely not. No, what you should do if you're an illustrator and a writer is you should submit the entire manuscript and a few sample pieces of art. You don't need to illustrate the entire book. You can say, because at the end of the day, you always want to give your publisher the benefit of the doubt of saying, would you be willing to let somebody else illustrate this? We love this text, but, or would you be, or to hire you as an illustrator for somebody else's text.
The characters are unique and they're something that have never been around before. So it's a unique character, it's a unique setting, it's something that has...
If you've already illustrated the whole book, then by all means, submit the whole book if you'd like to. It doesn't have to be bound, though. I mean, the less finished it looks, the more the message that you're going to... What you want to do is you want to send them the message that I'm someone who can be worked with. Okay. You want to send them the message that you are open to revisions, that you are open to rewrites and reworking and so forth. And if you send something that's really finished, publishers get a little nervous because they think, oh, this person is going to be resistant to feedback and to change. So you almost don't want it too polished. Better to send rough sketches of the whole book and 3 finished pieces of art. Yeah.
Kind of detail that you just told us, do most publishers kind of say that explicitly?
On their website?
Yeah. You're going to submit, do they have specific specifications?
They do. Every publisher has their, you pretty much will be thinking about pitching to agents before you pitch to publishers, because most publishers are pretty strict about not accepting unsolicited manuscripts. Not all, but most. So, it mostly begins with pitching to agents. Every good literary agent has their submission guidelines on their website, and unfortunately, they're all unique to that agency. So before you submit anywhere, you want to go to that agent's website and you want to see what their particular guidelines are, because maybe they just want a query letter before they get the whole manuscript, and maybe they want a self-addressed stamped return envelope, maybe they don't. You want to be really sure to show them that you've put in the time to study what their guidelines are and to respect them. And then they'll be doing the submitting to the publishers. There are some exceptions to that, and a book like I mentioned before, like Writers and Illustrators Marketplace, is your best resource, or Literary Marketplace, which, as I said, you can find in the library, in terms of finding out which publishers are open to unsolicited manuscripts from people who don't have agents, and what their submission guidelines are. Anybody else? Yeah.
One is just for my own edification. When you did
Simeon's Gift.
Simeon's Gift, did you use the same illustrations that your dad had made originally?
Oh, good question. No, we didn't. And it was tricky, actually. Fortunately, my dad has illustrated some of our other books. So we have a series that was inspired by Sam, who, as you can see, is both my kids are a great source of inspiration to both me and my mom in writing. So there's a series called Dumpy the Dump Truck that we first started out writing with that my father illustrated. And there are 10 books in that series. So he's done a lot of books with us. And he also illustrated The Great American Massacre because he's a theatrical designer. So we couldn't think of anyone better. But when it came time for Simeon's Gift, our editor said, this is not quite the right style. He had done these wonderfully sweet, slightly primitive illustrations based on sketches of mine that he had put together with kind of Venetian tiles and things. It was very sweet and quirky, but it was never designed to be published. It was just for my pleasure, Our editor felt that it really wanted to have more of a medieval manuscript, illuminated manuscript kind of feel. Much more fully realized, much more of a defined line and so forth. So we set out looking for, this is a great story actually, we set out looking for the perfect illustrator who could capture that illuminated manuscript feel, and every time we would go into a library or bookstore, we kept pulling books off the shelf, and it was always the same guy, this guy Gennady Spirin. And we thought, well, this is obviously a sign, because every time we go, something like this, it turns out to be him. So we took these books back to our editor and we said, this is who we want, this is what we think it should be. And she said, oh, great, first of all, he's Russian, he doesn't speak English at all. Second of all, he's incredibly hard to get. He's incredibly busy, he's incredibly famous, he's like, Caldecott winner, and, so you're never going to get him. And we said, well, could we just ask, could you just try? And he has his son pre-screen books to be considered to illustrate, because he doesn't speak English, and so his son does his translation for him, and he will only choose to illustrate things that he feels emotional resonance and that he can contribute something to. Well, the long story short is he'd actually, because he's Russian and doesn't speak any English, had never heard of my mom and didn't know who she was, and so, but he liked the story. And so what was so wonderful for us was that he responded to the quality of this text and the storytelling, and chose to do it because he felt he could bring something to it and not for any other reason, which was a real thrill. He's an amazing artist. He said, through his son, I paint 12 pictures, he said, and then it's finished, and I deliver the art. I don't correct. I do nothing afterwards. And we were like, okay, It was with my dad. My dad, he'll send a picture over a sketch, and we're like, well, could you make the nose a little bit bigger? Would you add some whiskers over here? And we are so interfering. So this was daunting. But the day he came in, he looks like Santa Claus. And he came in and he spread these oil paintings out on the table, and they were so beautiful and so breathtaking. And we were like, thank you. They were just incredible. The one problem being that the one character of a doe, and this was the problem in translation, he had painted as a stag with these great horns, and he wouldn't fix it. But he would allow the art director to Photoshop the horns out. So it's a good story.
I think we have time for one more.
Okay. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about finding a good agent and what we should look for?
It's very tough. The best thing I can say in terms of, there are a couple of really esteemed literary houses out there. The best ones are Writers House in New York, Sterling Lord, and for children's books, there's a wonderful agency called Dunham Literary, Dunham. What you want is, ideally, is somebody who gets your genre. If you're a children's book writer, you want to go with someone who has a lot of children's book writers and who really understands the genre. Don't make the mistake of thinking, they don't have a lot of children's book writers, so they'll really pay attention to me. No, you want someone who really understands the children's book market. You want somebody who really understands the mystery market, or whatever your genre is. And ideally, somebody who's been in the business. Again, there's a tremendous amount of turnover. I mean, people become agents and editors, and then they go on, and it's just extraordinary how quickly they jump from one to the next to the next. So you want to make sure that it's somewhere where there's some consistency, and that whoever you are working with is someone who's been there for a couple of years at least and knows something about the industry. You can mostly find out that stuff from these literary magazines and journals that I tell you about. A lot of times they'll do profiles of agents and agencies, and you can read and get a sense of that particular agent's voice and perspective. At the end of the day, it's going to be about a personal meeting and whether you're simpatico with that person. I mean, like anything else. It's going to be walking into the room and sitting down with them and saying, do we have chemistry? Do we respect one another? Can we have a dialogue? And some agents really think of themselves as creative and want to have a voice in editing your manuscript before you send it out to editors. And so you just want to be really sure that you trust their judgment before you allow them to start meddling with your manuscript, because most of them are frustrated writers. Okay. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.